Trojan horse is about ready to disgouge all of the lawyers by night. So stay with us. We're going to talk about what is about to break in Europe. We'll be right back. Now, this last week, as the key players in the world's largest banks, key political leaders, the IMF fund, as they were meeting secretly in Austria, the Bilderberg Group, we had the Greek economic crisis coming to even more of a head. Looks like they have reached an impasse, at least for now, for the foreseeable future. Markets are reacting, and Greece creditors are digging in after the debt talks founder. This is a report from Reuters. It says Greece and its creditors hardened their stances on Monday after the collapse of talks aimed at preventing a default and possible euro exit, prompting Germany's EU commissioner to say the time had come to prepare for a, quote, state of emergency, unquote. Now, the Prime Minister of Greece, Alexis Tsipras, said that he blamed creditors. And it's interesting because we see the leaders of the other European countries putting pressure on Greece because it wouldn't look that good if it was coming directly from the banks. Nevertheless, this is coming from the banks. And the Greeks are not being fooled by this. Of course, they had the story of the Trojan horse. They know precisely what this is about. Of course, the way the Trojan horse comes to us today is packaged as a welfare state. That's the way the IMF set up the third world decades ago. Once Robert McNamara became head of the IMF, they went from a situation that was similar to the Marshall Plan in Europe, where they helped people to improve their infrastructure, improve their manufacturing capacity, improve their income generation, their standard of living. Instead, they made a change under Robert McNamara. What they decided they would do was to encourage the developing countries to not develop, but to rather create a welfare state. By giving them loans for a welfare state, McNamara was accused of rent seeking. In other words, creating a situation where these people would never be wealthy enough to ever get out of debt to the bankers. And that is precisely what we see happening in Europe as well. That is the Trojan horse of the 21st century. Now, this is what they had to say. They said, no more new proposals. Take it or leave it time is upon us, I think, or very close to it, said one Euro official. Now, the Greek Prime Minister Tsipras blamed, quote, political expediency, unquote, on the part of the lenders for the impasse and their insistence on new cuts in pensions. And he says this is after 5 years of looting under the bailouts. And they say it's primarily coming from three institutions, the European Commission, the IMF, and the European Central Bank. They are the ones who are putting the pressure on the politicians. And then it appears as if this is pressure, a struggle between Germany and Greece. No, it is really the bankers who are behind all of this, the same people that we just saw meeting at the Bilderberg conference. Now, the Greeks, on the other hand, are demanding an end to the creditor looting, they say, after the talks break down. They say they're fed up with years of austerity. Athens has balked at demands to raise taxes and cut pensions in order to narrow its fiscal deficit. And of course, if they don't do that, then the bankers want to just take over the country, take it bit by bit, because that is the end game. The end goal is for them to own everything. They're not content necessarily just to have us renting from them constantly, going further and further into debt. At one point, they're going to want to take possession of our countries fiscally and take the resources as well. In lieu of that, we see that the Greeks also see what is coming down the line. It's something that's going to be coming down the line for us as well if we don't get out of this endless cycle of increasing debt to the central bankers. Greek banks are now seeing a deposit outflow of $449 million just today. They're saying that people have these talks back and forth between the IMF fund and the government have fed uncertainty and fears that capital controls will be introduced. Now, that's basically just saying that they're not going to let you take your money out of the bank, or they will take it out for you as a haircut. Just take their resources straight out. And of course, the effect this is having is that stocks are falling around the world. Around the world on Monday, they felt the ripple effect of the Greek crisis. Losses were broad across risky assets such as equities throughout major stock indexes for the lows of the session. They say, however, that gold and silver did rise. Now, as we see this play out, and as we see them try to tighten the noose around Greece, we know where this is heading for us, and we have to ask, do we really want to have a closer tie in with this European Union as they are experiencing these financial difficulties? Is that really something we want to be more tightly integrated with? Do we want to have a political and economic union? That's precisely what this is. Senator Sessions has seen these agreements, and he says that's precisely what they're doing. Now, in order to do that, we've got a couple of different ways that Boehner and the GOP leadership, a couple of carrots that they're offering to people. One of them is to say that they are going to extend welfare benefits to people who lose their jobs. Really? Does that make you feel bad? Would you rather have your job, or would you rather have some temporary welfare benefits that will be removed in a few years? Now, that was the issue, the TAA, and we have a report from John Bound coming up about that. But of course, that was voted down last week. Now the GOP has a different strategy that they're offering. In this particular one, they're going to raise taxes on small businesses to help to pay for the unemployment benefits of the people who are going to lose their jobs. You see how it works out? American workers lose, American small business loses, but the big multinational corporations and the banks are big winners, and they're the ones who are writing the laws in secret. They're the ones who are writing this treaty in secret, and quite frankly, John Boehner shouldn't even be involved in a treaty. They should require 2/3 of the Senate to vote for this, but of course, that's what the TPA, the fast track, is all about. It's about changing the rules so they can slide this thing through in a way that they could not get it through if they were to follow the rules. Now, they point out that the TAA was originally supposed to be financed with Medicare cuts. Well, that got pushed back. So now what they're going to do is they're going to possibly, as soon as tomorrow, have a vote on Obamacare. That's on Tuesday. A vote to give the IRS more power and more incentives to go after small business. What are they going to do? Well, they're going to put out essentially a bounty on small businesses to make sure that they dot every I, cross every T on their 1099 forms. And if they don't, they are tripling and quintupling the penalties on this. They are basically going to try to put out small business because, you know, the large companies, it's kind of like a bumblebee going through a spider web. It doesn't catch the big guys. It only catches the small flies. And that's what they're going to be coming after with these taxes. John Bound has more about the TAA, yet another acronym.
Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions warns there will be another attempt in Congress on Tuesday to push through TAA and fast-track authority. If that happens, it will empower the president to form a Pacific Union encompassing 40% of the world's economy in 12 nations, each with one equal vote. Once the union is formed, foreign bureaucrats will be required to meet regularly to write the Commission's rules, regulations, and directives, impacting American jobs, wages, and sovereignty, Sessions said in a statement posted on his Senate webpage. The Trade Adjustment Assistance, or the TAA, would allegedly protect workers from the consequences of the TPA fast track. House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi and House Speaker John Boehner crafted TAA as a compromise to nudge Democrats who fear a backlash from constituents. TAA, however, would not protect workers as transnational corporations continue to pillage industries and move jobs offshore under TPA and fast track. Sessions writes, Fast Track will not only apply to the Pacific Union, but can expedite an unlimited number of yet unseen international compacts for 6 years. There are already plans to advance through Fast Track, the Trade-in Services Agreement, the goal of which includes labor mobility among more than 50 nations, further eroding the ability of the American people to control their own affairs. The globalists are using trade deficits and labor mobility to further reduce wages of American workers. TPA would extend and increase the corrosive effect of job losses begun under NAFTA. Between 1979 and 1994, trade eliminated 2.4 million jobs in the U.S., wrote Robert E. Scott, an economist for the Economic Policy Institute, in 1998. Growing trade deficits were responsible for most of these job losses, which were concentrated in manufacturing because most trade involves the sale of manufactured goods. NAFTA added to the flow of jobs out of the U.S. by encouraging firms to move production to Mexico and Canada. Our trade deficit with both countries increased from $16 billion in 1993 to $48 billion in 1996 in constant 1987 dollars. The U.S. lost 395,000 jobs as a result of the NAFTA deficits. Japan and Mexico eventually lost manufacturing to China, In 2013, the overall U.S. trade deficit with China expanded to $315 billion. That big drain tends to slow U.S. economic growth at a time when our government debt is huge and unemployment is high. Establishment economists routinely state globalist free trade is healthy for the economy and creates domestic jobs. Former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for the Reagan administration, Paul Craig Roberts, wrote, "The claim that jobs offshoring by U.S. corporations increases domestic employment in the U.S. is one of the greatest hoaxes ever perpetrated. Over the last decade, the net new jobs created in the U.S. have nothing to do with the multinational corporations. The jobs consist of waitresses and bartenders, healthcare and social services, retail clerks, and while the bubble lasted, construction. These are not the high-tech, high-paying jobs that the new economy promised, and they are not the jobs that can be associated with global corporations. Moreover, these domestic service jobs are themselves scarce." Sessions writes, "While elites dream of a world without borders, voters dream of a world where the politicians they elect put this country's own citizens first. The movement among Americans toward a decent, honest populism, toward a refocusing on the needs of American citizens and American interests, grows stronger by the day. Every vote to come before Congress, beginning with the next fast-track push, will face this test. Does your plan strengthen or weaken the social and economic position of the loyal, everyday working American?" John Bound for INFOWARS.com.
Yes, of course, that is the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, the TAA. No, it's really just welfare benefits. We're going to be exporting jobs, then creating a new welfare program, and paying for that by raising taxes on small business. That's the GOP plan. What are the Democrats going to do? Well, Pelosi says we need to slow down fast track. We need to get a better deal for the American people. No, we need to stop fast track. We need to stop this unconstitutional process on this treaty right now. And we don't need to hold out for a better deal for the American people. She's holding out for a better deal for American politicians. They want to get a little bit more payback before they're going to sign on to this thing. And believe me, they will sign on to it once they get their paycheck. I guess Boehner didn't hand those out on the floor before the vote like he did with the tobacco lobbyist back in the 90s. Now, if we look at this video that we have today on INFOWARS.com, a shock video of rioting immigrants in the UK who are trying to hijack trucks that are headed into the UK. They're in Calais, France, about to cross the channel. And if you look at this video there, it's total anarchy, chaos. This is a balkanization strategy. If you remember at the beginning of the program, we were talking about how this is a trap for the Greek economy, how they are essentially coming after them, taking their pensions, killing their pensions, raising their taxes. And of course, people are seeing this as a competition between rich states like Germany and the poorer states like Greece, who have a welfare system that is out of control. Let me explain to you that the way things are happening right now in Europe, and of course, this is being pushed by the banks, there's going to be an out-of-control welfare state in every one of the European countries. As Paul Joseph Watson reports, this is shocking footage that's filmed at the French port town of Calais. It shows desperate migrants attempting to break into delivery trucks headed to the UK, and another illustration of how the country's generous welfare system acts as a beacon for illegal aliens. And of course, who's behind this? It's the bankers. Paul Watson points out Goldman Sachs chairman and UN Special Representative for Migration, Peter Sutherland, said yesterday that Britain should take more migrants in order to avoid creating an environment of xenophobia and racism. That's right. If you don't drive your country into economic collapse with a Cloward and Piven strategy, with the IMF's strategy, came out about the same time that Cloward and Piven came out with their strategy. We had McNamara at the IMF say that they're going to put people on rent-seeking status, increase the welfare state to the point that they will never get off of it. And of course, if you object to that strategy of the bankers bankrupting your country, taking control of everything, you are xenophobic and you are racist. But take a look at this article from Reuters. Migrants race through Italy to dodge EU asylum rules. And they point out that last month, one particular individual that they're talking about, rescued with hundreds of other migrants in the Mediterranean Sea, was brought into Sicily. This 24-year-old, instead of applying for refugee status in Sicily or Italy, where he landed, as European law dictates, instead he made his way to just south of the Austrian border, and he hopes to cross into Austria, travel through Germany to Sweden, where his brother